What we're going to talk about today is first of all, the difference between the two types of feedback and how we learn positively and how we provide feedback for growth. The second aspect is around observation and how we establish a coaching contract with our direct reports to establish ourselves as their givers of feedback, so they understand why we're doing it and what we will do with them. And we will look finally at the key technique that we will use, the key tool, which is 2x2 feedback. So as a reminder, and this goes all the way back to our first time together when we talked around emotional intelligence and we talked about the effects of adrenaline and cortisol. And if you remember, we talked about two different types of learning: limbic learning, or the survival brain, and then neocortex learning, the thriving part of the brain. So how do we learn as human beings? Well, we get presented with feedback. Now, the survival brain learns through the conditioned feedback of consequences. Exactly the same as a child. If a child puts their hand near a flame, they get the immediate consequence of some pain, and they learn through conditioning not to do that in the future. It's purely survival learning. What we're interested in is the powerful effect of positive and constructive feedback. How we give people feedback that they can accept as being processed by their neocortex, and therefore this aids them to improve and to thrive and to grow. This is the type of feedback that we're really interested in giving our direct reports. So our prime tool for doing this is 2x2 feedback, a really simple device that we can use, but incredibly effective. And just to remind you what those steps are. So the first thing that we would do, having observed our coachee in performance, whether it's in a pitch or a presentation, we would observe and we would give them this 2x2 feedback. And the first step is to ask the coachee what they did well. What did you do well? And remembering our coaching techniques around impact questions and active listening, we need to make sure that they actually engage properly with our question and not get embarrassed or not try and distract, or, well, I don't think there was anything I did particularly well. No, what did you do well? And be insistent upon the question. And then we will offer them an observation. This is what I think you did really well. Now, these two steps build the confidence, build the trust between us. We want somebody living in their neocortex to receive the constructive feedback that we have for them, the growth feedback. So the step 3 is we ask them, what would you do differently next time? We're asking them to give themselves a piece of advice. On reflection, this is what I could have done differently. Next time around, this is what I'll try, would be great answers to those questions. And then we will finish up. Okay, here's one thing that I would suggest you think about and try differently next time. Very simple, very powerful way to give people feedback, particularly if they get used to this being a discipline that we follow as part of the contract that we have for them. And what you'll find is the more disciplined you are in your habits, the more that they will do this for themselves. They'll come out of a pitch, they'll sit with you in the back of the Uber, and the first thing they'll do is they'll start this process. Well, I can tell you already the one thing I think I did well, but I tell you what I do differently next time. And they're already into that space of very high level of trust, very high level of self-reflection, and then we can give them that powerful feedback. And that is the feedback that builds skills. So a few thoughts just before we close in terms of our ability to give powerful, constructive, positive feedback. The first is we have to have a coaching contract established. We have to earn the right. We have to set the discipline. This is part of how we build trust with people. This is how I will manage you. This is why I'm going to do it. This is what I'm going to do. And have people know, so that we don't ever lack the courage to take the step of giving somebody feedback. And feedback should be simply what we have observed. We've got to be very careful to distinguish between feedback, which is the passing of observation and information and data and facts, from advice, which is offering up a solution, offering up a piece of advice, maybe even offering up a judgment. Keep those two things very, very separate. So feedback is simply information that they can take on board. I think that giving feedback to people, particularly constructive feedback, I think this is the toughest thing that we have to do as a people manager. And I don't underestimate the discomfort that it can create for us. That real stressful moment when we know we've got to have a conversation with somebody, we're going to have to give them some feedback that might hurt their feelings, that might feel very judgmental to them, that might feel almost like the end of the world to them. And yet we have to pay them the respect. We are their manager. This is a professional, interested in their own development, interested in raising their performance, interested in fully realizing their potential. And we are their manager. We're probably the only person that they can really rely on to tell them the truth. We have to manage our own discomfort. As a manager, we do not have the luxury of avoiding the potential discomfort that will come from sitting with someone and giving them the feedback. But if your coaching contract is in place, if you can preface this with, I'm going to give you some tough feedback here, and I hope you know that the reason that I am doing this is because I'm solely interested in your improvement and your performance, and I give you this feedback in 100% support of you being successful. Now, this is also where we can then switch, because as a manager, you may well have some very strong advice. In fact, you may well have very strong direction to give people. And this is the place to do it. When you've coached, when you've given the feedback, and at the end, leave them with a gift. I think it's very difficult for people if their experience of their manager is that all their manager does is coach them. This actually does not leave people feeling safe. So the way I express this is, at the end of any coaching conversation, at the end of any interaction, leave a little piece of yourself so that they do know what you've been thinking. And you can offer this as an observation, you can offer it as advice, or you can offer it as a very strong non-negotiable direction. And this is why we've always got to have ourselves under self-regulation.